Yeah, and so how long do you normally go for?
I try to keep it around 20 minutes, but I just added a couple that we broached into the half hour because we were having a really good time.
Yeah, and you know what? I actually have an hour, so we can go whenever. As short or as long as you want.
Okay.
I'll let you you feel it out.
Cool. All right.
Cool.
So
I'm going to just start recording on this end too. So
cool. All right, I got your recording double. So we have triple. So we got belt, suspenders, and duct tape. We're all good.
Right. There you go.
Okay. So I'll just count it down. 3, 2, 1. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Tech Story Podcast. And today I'm joined by a fellow podcaster, startup, and now soon to be released author, Jeremy Streich. Jeremy, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Doug. How are you doing?
I am well. We have an interesting story about your roommate, but that's for another time.
We'll keep that for round 2.
Yeah, that'll be round 2. I like that. I like that a lot. So Jeremy, thanks for agreeing to be on. I just rented these lips today. I think they're not quite working.
3D printed.
3D printed. Yeah, I put them. Very good. I like that. But anyway, so tell me about this. Tell me about this startup here. So I don't get a lot of startup people on there, and so tell me how you came from startup, and then we'll sort of venture into how you became an author.
First of all, Doug, thank you for having me on your show. I've listened to a bunch of episodes now that after we've connected, and I know that you have you work for Microsoft, and Microsoft's really a company that I truly admire. And just like growing up in the 90s and early 2000s, I've seen just the way that company comports itself. And it's just, I respect everything about it. And for them to consult with you, or maybe that's not your actual role.
Satya calls me up every day.
It says something about you. What's that?
Satya calls me up every day.
Yeah, right. But on my personal journey, it's been kind of circuitous to say the least. But that said, I really, after I graduated college, I'd been kind of traveling a lot. Like I studied abroad and went all over the place. And, that's kind of the way my mind worked / still works, just jumping from idea to idea. And I sort of slowly started to realize that it's all about depth. It's really not going to all these different buckets, because you want to be able to stick your whole hand in rather than just getting your fingernails wet. I guess how that really started was I drove across the country. I grew up in New England. So after graduating, I had a really close friend at Stanford, and he's like one of the smartest people, not just that I've ever met. He's one of the smartest people in the world, like truly, as many of them are, you'd imagine. Mm-hmm. And I just felt really like buttressed, buoyed by his presence being there, and me having this idea. It was a very nascent idea for a podcast company. And this was, 3-4 years ago. And we're doing this in the tail end of 2020. So podcast was not what it is now. And for future Doug and future Jeremy and future other people, it's probably not even close to what it is now. So we were just trying to basically build a search for sound was like my true, the ideal. And what I really like, my passion, and I hope that someone listening to this will do it, is I really wanted to build Wikipedia for audio and specifically for podcasts. So, Kevin Kelly, he talks about in his book, The Inevitable, he's amazing. He's been on a bunch of podcasts too. And he talks about how Wikipedia is really an underemphasized change in the sort of like global culture, because you really have access to say what you will about the information. It's pretty damn accurate, and it's all interlinked. So I just found that to be a really cool and provocative concept to, if you linked a podcast that, let's say, I mentioned Microsoft earlier, or you mentioned Satya, other shows, you click Satya and you'd see everywhere that he was, mentioned in. And then there's all these different outlets for marketing and for content. And I think that it'll happen. And what I realized over a course of like 3.5 years was that this was just a task that I'm a little bit arrogant. So like I try to tackle these huge problems, and this one was just something that really kind of, it outkicked my coverage. It really, it was just I had amazing people on board, and it's none of their problems. It was a me thing. And we can talk a little bit about how, like, the underlying reason, how I know it was a me thing. And that's sort of ultimately become this book. But that's like the high level sort of idea of it.
So before we get to the me thing on that one, and there's sometimes it's arrogance, sometimes it's just people like a challenge. I went and did an Ironman triathlon. Well, one, because my best friend was a beer salesman and he talked me into it. But, it was, having grown up with asthma, I, didn't do much in high school from an athletic standpoint. And it gave me something to do when I was in my 30s to sort of prove that I had that with me. So it's not necessarily an arrogance that comes along with it. Sometimes it's you want to prove things. But also, do you think, and the reason I'll just sort of defer back to some Microsoft stuff is sometimes you're just too early to this. And if I go back to the tablet PC days with Windows XP, this was well before the iPad, but this was a passion of Bill Gates and all to do that. And we had hardware. Unfortunately, the hardware wasn't where it needed to be. The battery life was about 40 minutes, and it weighed about 8 pounds. Not exactly, it was like a stone tablet, not something I could see with the iPad. And the OS was a bit heavy, and it was really written for a pen, and it was just sort of ahead of its time. But without that work, the iPad may never have come to be, simply because you didn't have something in the past to look at to say, how can we improve this? This was an idea that was maybe just too early. And as I was listening to, you're discussing what you wanted, to be able to tie all those different things together, there's got to be a lot of artificial intelligence and machine learning to be able to consume and categorize and identify all that information and all these different audio sources you're talking about. So I think maybe you're just a little bit early. Maybe you're a little bit too hard on yourself.
Well, I appreciate that. And I think it's probably a combination of the two. As most things, I've learned the hard way that most things are never A or B. It's like right in between the two. Yeah. I guess I should say most things aren't A or C. It's B.
Yes.
But it's funny that you brought up the iPad and what was the computer?
The tablet PC. Mentioned? This was Windows XP days. This was early 2000s. Because and maybe we'll touch on this towards the end of the conversation, or if you want to dive in now. But you asked me to think of, and you always talk to your guests about tech story. And my tech story is actually very, very closely related to what you just talked about. So, I think that there's just very common themes. Sometimes you're too early, sometimes it's a hard problem. And you're right that artificial intelligence would probably help. But, I don't, it's all part of the story. I needed that to happen. I needed all of these things for me to get to where I am right now. I met some absolutely incredible people along the way who have helped make me the person that I am, who have helped me be able to write this book that I've just written, and just become like a much more humble, more focused, at least try to be those things. They've sort of instilled those ethos. See, and that's where again the arrogance piece of this. It's at a time. There was I related a story a podcast or so ago about a humbling event when I was a senior in high school. But it is a story. The story is all how every good story has an arc, and it's about the struggle that the protagonist goes through. There's highs and lows, and it's the battle that sort of shapes you and prepares you and introduces you to the right people. I firmly believe that things happen for a reason, and we meet people for maybe it's we don't know about it until later, how the impact that they'll have on us. And it sounds like that's the journey you went through. So let's go through. We'll do the tech fail here a little bit later, but let's go ahead and go through the story arc of how what you learned and how you ended up where you are today.
And I want to ask you a question too.
Okay.
Because you you made me think about so you're talking about like the story arc, and we've all heard the hero's journey,
Mm-hmm.
and there's always like the down. You have to have the
Mm-hmm.
trouble. And do you think that is like a requirement? We famously see someone like Mark Zuckerberg,
Mm-hmm.
who really, I mean, I guess his down may have been, what was it, Face Mash, the sort of like frat boy thing that he did in his dorm.
Yeah.
But that's not much of a down, really.
Well,
he made a pretty big, he made what he needed to do, but I guess that is a down. So my question really is, do you think it's like a requirement that you have to have these perils, these challenges, so that you can make something of real value?
I don't, it's what I find, and it's a personal thing, and Zuckerberg's story is not over yet. So we don't know, right?
Great point.
There could
Great point, Doug.
And based on some things been happening here recently with all the hiding of links and stuff, not to get political, but that's a real thing that comes up that could be really a really interesting curve. But anyway, to go back to your question, is there was I read somewhere that as you're going through the struggle, human nature is we enjoy watching other people grow and get through struggles, because one, it gives us hope. As we all struggle, we all need something to sort of latch on to ensure that we can get through this. This hero did this very similar thing, and they talked about the more dire the struggle, the more interest we get into a story. But without the struggle, the struggle sort of humanizes people. Because we all have a struggle. Again, it's on various magnitude, if you will, but it's you need to. That's for me. That's what keeps interesting going on. Can you get through this? So that's my spin on it. I think it's a critical part of a good story. When I tell stories from even like a sales perspective, I'll get into a little sales pitch, and this company was, they were having the X problem, and they were, I start putting a little bit of that struggle in there. Then as they implemented and made a change, things got better. But also the other thing that this key is, the hero has to do this themselves. They have to conquer these struggles themselves, or it's sort of cheating if you don't, because somebody just plucks them up and does that. Well, that's sort of those aren't the best stories. Those were you hit the bottom, or you hit these walls, but you keep going. And again, you're learning, you're building a team as you go along, sort of like what you said. So that's a long-winded answer for yes.
Yeah. No, and I think just to like add on, I'm I'm on the fence of millennial Gen Z, like literally the separating year. And I think a narrative that's been told to, like people in their 20s, maybe teens, and people in their 30s has just been, 100% what you just said. Everything you need to persevere, you need to push through those challenges, and you do need to do it on your own. But for me, I really could not have done it. And I know, Doug, you're saying you will agree with this, or I shouldn't put words in your mouth, but I expect you'll agree with this, that it's you need to go over these hills on your own. But, like in Dante's famous, Dante's Inferno, Virgil is kind of like this little ghost who's giving him sort of advice because he's going through this very, very challenging time. So I think it's really important for us to kind of recognize that, that there's like teachers. I'm so grateful for the teachers of all kinds. I don't mean just education, the people who have taught me how to be a primate, a good human, because it's just, we have to get through it on our own for sure. When we're running that marathon, mile 20, you're alone there, but you have that trainer that's gotten you all the way up to that point and has told you, hey, Jeremy, hey, Doug, you are going to get to 26.2. Like,
we've had these,
it's already happened.
We've had these coaches or people that, in a way, I guess you could say they help us. They offer advice and stuff, but it's still up to the hero to accept it and then act upon it. Right. So you do have sages, and we all need if you go back to the old Kung Fu, TV shows and stuff on that, you have the wise, the guru that's giving him this sage advice. And it's up to the hero to digest that implement it in their way and go forward. So I guess that's the cheat, is we never truly do it alone. We're better with people to support us, but we still have to do the effort. We still have to fight these battles. We can't have somebody do it on our behalf and then sort of claim the cup on the other side.
At the end of the day,
mm-hmm.
It's Luke who did the battle.
Yes,
not Yoda.
Right.
You know, Luke trained with Yoda, but it's still Luke at the end of the day.
Yeah, that was a good story. Although anyway. Yeah,
that would be like 4 hours.
Oh, yeah.
We'd have to be Joe Rogan to go talk about Star Wars for the next 3 hours.
So you've sort of made this thing, and you're going along the journey. Help bring us forward to date to where now you're an author.
Sure. Okay. So all the while, and I sort of hinted at this earlier, while I was traveling, I kind of did the nomad-ish life, not true nomad, where you go a different place every month or two. I kind of cheated. I would either do, I would get an apartment in London for a month. I would get an apartment in, the best one I had was in Malaga, the southern tip of Spain, which is like a beautiful beach town. And I had, it was like 10 euros a night, unbelievable. For downtown, I had my own little balcony. I was literally over the heart. You know, how most European cities have that, bustling, vibrant. There's people playing music. People are out drinking at bars. So I had a balcony looking over that. And I was just able to work on the startup from anywhere because the team was remote. And this whole time, I was also working on the book that it's called The Tree of Knowledge, that's coming out actually in maybe 2 or 3 days. It was sort of like how do I say this? It was not a secret, but it was something that nobody knew that I was doing. Even when it actually started maybe 2-3 weeks after I graduated from college. I took the law school entrance exam, believe it or not, and was so fed up with just everything. I really took it to appease other people. People had been telling me that I would make a lawyer since I was a little kid. And it was just a narrative that people had put in my heads. And I thought, okay, let's see how it goes. So the next day after the law school entrance exam, I hopped on a flight. I actually drove to New York because it's the only airport that flew into Cuba. So I hopped on a flight to Cuba. I'd always been very interested in that culture and hablando español. And there was just this one moment where I was like really kind of lost, but also exploring and really excited about what was next. Recent college graduate, had all these random, like I mentioned before, scattered ideas. So I'm on one of those cool little horseback tours, and I have one guide with me, and I actually talk a little bit about this in the intro of the book, but he asked me a question in Spanish, and he's like, ¿Quieres saber qué pasará? Yeah, like what happened? You want to know what happens next? You want to know where we'll go next? And I was just sort of, we were on this hill looking over this beautiful green valley of the tobacco plants and low mountains called magotes that are just totally green. And I just was kind of no, I am just happy where I am right now. And it sort of crystallized this. I'd always been interested in writing, and being in Cuba just made me, it sort of put together all the travels. And I had the idea, what would Earth have been like if Pangea had never split apart? So for anyone who's not really sure, Pangea is definitely taught more in schools these days, but it was like a super continent. Africa, North America, South America, all the continents were together. And for some reason, I just started noticing that the world is not so different, which I think is a similar tale that we could talk about with people and cultures. There's all these little commonalities, and that's definitely a theme in my book. So I just started writing, that night, sitting on the patio, had my little orange moleskin notebook, and was just writing because I was kind of lost and sad and didn't know what to do with myself. And then it's became like a thing as I was building this startup and continuing to feel sort of lost, like a rudderless boat in the ocean. I would just write. It was like my escape, and I would just write it in the morning, at night, and really just wrote and wrote and wrote way too much. Honestly, it ended up being such garbage. Like the bones were great, but there was just so much. Uh, Imagine like an overstuffed teddy bear that's so overstuffed that the cotton is like poking through the armpits and the eyes and all that. But if you pull the cotton out, maybe it's a decent story. So yeah, it just took like maybe 4 years from there. And I was writing as I was doing this business. And I kind of told myself, like, all right, I have these two things. Like maybe one will take off and it'll lift up the other. Rising tides lift all ships. And if one of them fails, then I still have the other one. But that's, I mean, I don't know what you think, Doug, but I kind of take that as a little bit of an insecure narrative. Like I was too scared to really jump in to one or the other because there's just so much uncertainty in the world, in our lives, and being a 22, 23-year-old entrepreneur.
No, I think we all have that at some point in time. There's our default safety valve thing, and we get a comfort level, and going on. It's scary to make a commitment to go, like I said, stick your hand all the way in to do that. But so when you look back at that decision, did you because it sounded like to me that the writing was very cathartic and it gave you energy. It sort of recharged your batteries, so that the next day or whenever you could go fight the battle that you were doing from the startup perspective. And that's, to me, listening to you talk, that's sort of what it sounds like. Is that, did you sort of feel those vibes?
I'd never thought of it that way, Doug, but I think you hit the nail on the head. I've heard, and some of my friends do like creative therapy. Like they go into offices, right? And they have the people working in Microsoft's office draw or trace lines, and there's actually neuroscience behind it. One of my friends, Dr. Selena Bartlett, she puts out tracing books, and it's amazing how awesome you feel after just tracing, like a coloring book for adults, just tracing the lines. And I think that was kind of what was happening for me, is that this writing was just like what you were saying, a way to step away from the business side of things and just go into my own little imaginative world and tell the story. That's, there had been a lot of things. There's so much that's gone on in the world, probably always, but definitely in the last 10, 20 years. I mean, obviously right now, but I just had this sort of story in the back of my head about how much we were destroying the environment and how humans, a book that really influenced this novel was absolutely Sapiens by Yuval Harari. His fingerprints are all over it. And I would say another one would be Behave by Robert Sapolsky. And they just talk about like the history of humanity and kind of talk, like primatology, primates, studying primates and how they relate, how we're just like them. So I had this sort of thought bouncing around in the back of my head about just how we are sort of we're burning the candle at both ends as like a species. We are destroying the environment, and not even from like a tree hugger. Like, all right, I love hiking. I've done some amazing, climbed a mountain here, there, but I'm not that guy that goes out there and chains himself to a tree to keep it from being cut down. And there's inscrutably, we are sapping the world, and like eventually it will rid itself of us. And like it's unfortunate in some ways. Who knows? I guess that's just because we're both human, so we think that. I'm, at least me. But on the other end of the spectrum, we're also kind of like in the tech world, we're building artificial intelligence and automation. And in that sense, we're making ourselves sort of obsolete as well. And of course, they'll always need humans to do things. And I am not of the camp that big data is going to just make us like little gerbils or anything like that. But there's no argument that, or I guess there's an argument, but I am of the camp that we are sort of putting ourselves, in that the Andrew Yang spectrum of we're putting ourselves in danger of needing to really reinvent our, personal need, our purpose, really. Because purpose is very important.
Yeah. And the fact that you got to interview Andrew Yang was pretty cool too. And, the way I look at, I refuse to accept the dystopian view, that we're going to be, Arnold Schwarzenegger is going to be naked in my driveway sometime soon, coming back to kill me or something. But, ideally, artificial intelligence should free us up. If you're plugging in sockets or something like that can be repeated, a machine can do, or if you're doing some type of task that can easily be done from automation, it's time to start thinking about upskilling what you can do. And the human brain has the capacity to learn so much stuff and do so much more than what a lot of people do. It's not to degrade any job or anything like that, but to think about it, there's nobody making ice boxes anymore since the refrigerator came out. There's a lot of things that have become obsolete. We're looking at, I saw there was somebody who had a boombox cassette player that now costs twice as much as what the one I used to do because, now the parts don't exist anymore. Now it's a collector's item, that's going on. So I definitely think that we need to upskill ourselves, but it's going to be very disruptive because there's a lot of people that don't have access to the education of some others. And, I hope that the internet and there's some ways to sort of free. That's a whole other discussion, right. But you're right. I mean, it's sort of, we need to do better. We need to do more and not be satisfied with where we're at.
Right. And I do think there's, another problem with that, that story that people tell themselves about, I'm going to be out of work, or you hit the nail on the head when you said everyone's really capable, and like truly everyone is capable about doing something complicated or doing something challenging. And it's really just like a lack of self-confidence, I think, that just keeps people from, like, for example, I have a really close friend he's absolutely brilliant. He's so creative. And it seems pretty clear to me that he is in a position where he should write a book, and it doesn't need to be long, but it's his time to write a book. And it's just like, he has these other allures, like he's going back to school, and it's just like a lack of confidence that he'll probably get to when he's a little bit older. And I think it ports to other, places. If we just sort of, and this is a really important theme in my book, is if it's really believing in yourself. It's like so trite and so cliche, but I mean, cliches they're right sometimes. And I think that just believing in yourself right now is more important. And I know everything is more important than ever before, but I really think it's more important than ever before, because we really have to take it, and the onus is on us, like you were talking about. It's really the individual who has to push through that barrier, and people have to reinvent themselves, and they all can. Like, people who are 60 years old are starting to meditate, and that's something that's just so foreign to them, but they're doing it. And it's proof that, an older person or just someone who's not trained in that can, you can learn. We can all learn. And I think we have to believe in ourselves to just do whatever, whether it's a creative endeavor, whether it's a new kind of intellectual endeavor. I think it's going to be even more important in the next 10 to 20 years. Oh,
I totally agree with you on that. And I'm like a living example of a dinosaur that can learn new things. I mean, I grew up in the generation, I went through all those iterations of the cell phone. I went through all these other things, and I've taught myself this all the time. And I still can't do TikTok, but that's a whole other story. But, I've taught myself these things, because I was curious and I was a nerd, and I have that capacity. I'm just that curiosity. And I think that's what, but to your point, it's that lack of self-confidence. It's the belief there that I'm not sure that I can do it. And just to go sort of close this part out there, if you go back to Henry Ford, and it's a psychological thing, whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. Right. Mm-hmm. And it's that mindset. It's that yeah, I can do this. Once you make that decision and you believe it and you live it, things change.
Mm-hmm. It's such a limiting narrative, and it's very pervasive. I don't know if it's the culture that's done it or something else even bigger, but it's definitely a common theme. Maybe that's part of humanity, or maybe it's something newer. I don't know.
Well, I'm really interested in just sort of seeing what the world would look like if the continents had never separated, to see how close we are. So I'm really excited that that's coming out. I want to grab a copy and read that and sort of broaden my expectations of it. But now I can't let you out of here without talking about this technology fail or this tech story that went on. So why don't you enlighten us on that?
I don't know if enlighten's the right word, but while I was living in San Francisco, I crossed paths with, of course, virtually crossed paths, but we ended up interacting in the real world with this gentleman named Gene Mosher. And Gene he was kind of, it seems like I think he's a little bit older than you, but it seems like you were sort of curious. You were working with the original Windows XP and you were kind of messing around with technology. And that sort of Steve Jobs era and Bill Gates, of course, when they were really just experimenting. The people who were the computer nerds were just discovering all these crazy capabilities. So Gene was a young kid. He was working at a sub-state, like a Subway restaurant, but deli style, I guess. So before Subway existed, and he was I'm not exactly. I think he was in New York, and so this is 1980s or so, and he was just tweaking around with one of the computers, and he started realizing that he could automate a lot of things. And ultimately, in 1986, he got one of the first, I don't remember the exact model, Atari 5200 or something. And it was one of the first computers that was actually had like a graphical user interface that you could touch, that like the iPad, you could actually press your finger on it. So Gene, being this very crafty, individual, made a touch screen, and this company is called View Touch that he started, and he started using it as his sub shop, and it exploded. The sub shop got so much more efficient, and then he opened up three more, and ultimately people started getting a little bit of buzz about this company View Touch because they had a touch screen in 1986. And my dates may be a little bit off, but Gene can correct me on that. And what's crazy is Gene's story. This is 1986. He had a touch screen. This is like the precursor of an iPad and the iPhone. And Gene goes to this Atari. I think it was like Comdex, one of those big.
Yeah, that precedes Consumer Electronics Show back in the day.
Okay, and it was in Vegas. Is kind of like what's that big tech show in Vegas?
Yeah, that's the Consumer Electronics Show. Happens in January.
Oh, CES, right. So he went to this and he brought his View Touch and put it on display, and the place blew up. Like they were throwing business cards at him. His people, he had to, his wife, I think, gave him like a shoebox to fill with these business cards. So Gene, he claims, was getting overflow with people interested in this concept. And at the time, I think Atari was building their own, and maybe there's probably a few other companies that I'm forgetting. And he says that Steve Jobs was in attendance at this event. So there's all this very interesting little lore that I think went on in the background. Like we do think of, I love Steve Jobs. Like I love his autobiography, and I do think he was like absolutely brilliant. But there are all these little things, and it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before. That the story, it is just you. The challenges come down to just you, but the little tools that you pick up along the way, that rock that you find on the side of the road that's going to help you later, that's something else that's coming in. And I just found that story when Gene told me about predating the iPhone and having, this sort of business that it was successful. Gene is successful in his own right, but he's not Steve Jobs, and he's not Bill Gates, and he's not these companies that have built massive empires. And I don't think he necessarily wanted that, but it shows ingenuity in small places. And I think it just shows that there's like all these different events that come together to build the iPhone. It's not just one guy. It's not just Steve.
No, you're right. I mean, we build upon other ideas, and we're trying to perfect it. So is they going with iPhone 12? iPhone 24. Who knows what that'll look like? But the industrial design and the stuff like that's really pretty cool. So what's next for you after you? Are you going to write another book or?
Yeah. So I mentioned briefly that I kind of wrote too much. So we actually had to cut, basically, because I don't know what I was doing. It's my first book. So I basically wrote 2 books, and we split them in half. So the first book that you're reading is coming out soon. And honestly, it's almost a different story compared to what I had written in that little notebook over the course of 4 years. But that said, we have the bones for the second book, which is still going to take another year or two to make, really, because one of my faults is that I just try to, I'm not going to say I'm a perfectionist, because I'm definitely not, but I tinker a lot. So I get worried that like this might not be the right way to say it, or maybe this would be a better idea. So we'll be working on this next book too for a little while now. And I'm also just starting out with a company that really builds like workshops and online courses. And I'm kind of consulting with them, as well as starting my own. I'm young. I can't really teach very much, but I do think that there is a need in this world. I mean, I bet a bunch of your listeners have heard or seen The Social Dilemma on Netflix. And this is something that living in San Francisco and now living in Austin, the tech sort of overflow on our natural tendencies is something that I'm really concerned about. I think about all the time. I write about, I journal about. And one of the things that, I've been able to write, over 200,000 words of this series so far, which is called The Last Archivist, is the series name. And the book 1 is called The Tree of Knowledge. And for some reason, I guess it's mostly due to listening to these people like Tim Ferriss, and reading James Clear, and getting motivation, getting ideas from actually a friend of mine, Cal Newport. His deep work talks about how you really need to focus and turn off all the distractions. So I'm rambling, but this course is, as a millennial who was able to be creative. So it's being creative in the digital age. So how to overcome all the distraction, and how to really, maybe it's reinventing yourself, or maybe it's inventing yourself as a creative thinker. And it'll be, maybe 10 courses, 10 classes, between 10 and 20. And that'll come out in, 3 to 6 months as I work on this book and, push the Tree of Knowledge, because that's just really, I think that everyone can, and maybe I'm projecting, but should be a little bit more creative after seeing the kind of anxieties and troubles and depressive tendencies that life can push me to. I think that being creative is just an incredibly powerful outlet, and I want people to overcome their own issues with this really tried and true method, and become a better person.
Well, I think that's a worthy goal of that. And you made this statement about, you're young, you can't teach anything. And some call it reverse mentoring, but I've learned a lot from people that are younger than me. And so, guides can come from all different ages and in unsuspecting places. So don't sell yourself short on that. And I think through listening to this podcast, people in the audience have learned something as well, regardless of the age that they're from. So what's the best way to get a hold of you?
So you can find me on Instagram at Jeremy, Jeremy .Streich, Streich. On Twitter, it's Jeremy F. Streich. And I mean, you can add me on LinkedIn if you'd like. I accept most people, especially ones who send a little message. Hey, I heard you on a podcast, something like that. But yeah, definitely, I'm pretty active on Instagram, and my podcast is called Through the Wire, THRU, the Wire, with my name. And if we could get a link for my book into this podcast called The Tree of Knowledge, or you could just go to my website. Really, that might be easiest stuff. So it's jeremyfstreich.com, and you can find me on all the socials, and feel free to connect. And I look forward to hearing about your journeys, maybe getting into creativity.
Cool. Well, thanks a lot. And we'll put all these links and stuff in the show notes for that. So, Jeremy, good luck on the book. I'm looking forward to it, and good luck in Austin. I know you just moved here, so fellow Texan. The weather's about to get nice for 2 days, and then it's going to be hot again. So,
yeah,
great having you on.
Doug. I appreciate you having me on here. It's really been a pleasure.
Cool. Thanks. Bye.
Bye now.